Way back when I was on daytime in ABC, the great Agnes Moorehead came on the show, and she told about touring the United States, and she was in Wisconsin one year, and she said, I was in a drugstore having a cup of coffee, and I could hear this unusual voice to the right of me. And I turned, she said, and there was this marvelous little boy. And he was talking about economics, and he was talking about Shakespeare. And it was just amazing. And I thought to myself, I'll probably hear about this little boy someday. Isn't that a nice story? Well, it does go on, because some years later, and not very many, the nice little boy directed her in Citizen Kane and in The Magnificent Ambersons. So it was you know who. His favorite thing not to be called, and there were several little clever titles people used for him, was Boy Genius. He could not stand to be called that. Noel Coward knew it, and when they told Noel Coward that Wells sent him his regards, he said, how is Destiny's Topped? Coward fans will probably get a kick out of that. I saw him play King Lear, and just before the curtain went up at the City Center in New York, a voice from behind the curtain said, this is Orson Welles speaking from behind the curtain. King Lear, of all the tragedies he suffered, did not suffer breaking both ankles on opening night. The curtain will go up soon, you'll see me in a wheelchair, and so on and so on. He was in the wheelchair. The Fool controlled the wheelchair. The reviews had been wonderful, and the Wells analysts all said, isn't that absolutely perfect for Orson to break his own ankles on opening night? And his career was colored that way in a lot of places. And if there was a tragedy to it, it was that he never really seemed to get all his geniuses under control. He was directing his then wife, Rita Hayworth, in a movie, and somebody yelled, stop, Miss Hayworth is sweating. And he turned and said, Miss Hayworth does not sweat, she glows. This became a rather famous remark. John Ford was his favorite director. In fact, his classy way of saying so was that somebody said, name the top 3 directors in America, Mr. Wells. And he said, well, there's John Ford, and John Ford. And he meant it. This is a delightful show to sit and do. I kept thinking, this isn't true. This is a dream. I know I got to outgrow that sort of attitude someday. But this can't be the real Orson Welles. It was, and a lady wrote to me, thank you for bringing Orson Welles back to his American audience. Orson Welles, July 27th, 1970. Enjoy it.
The Dick Cavett Show with special guest Orson Welles. Ladies and gentlemen, Dick Cavett.
Gee, what a great audience. That sign outside, beautiful girls dancing, is working, I think. Very nice to see you. And please be nice to our pages, would you? They have a hard job. It's not easy saying, sit down, stupid, to 500 people every night. Very nice to see you. Have you been reading about that thing that they have invented in England, that plastic self-destructible substance that they can make things out of? It will actually destroy itself after a time, which is very important. It's, they're going to make bottles and cans and Bobby Rosengarten records out of it, and it's really going to... Just a little joke, of course. It destroys itself in the sunlight. That's the interesting thing. Can you imagine guys saying, I have a special swimming suit I made for you, my dear? I guess not. I picture myself that they've made a tray of it, and you're sitting at a barbecue with a very hot tray full of food, and you suddenly have an almost religious experience. But, Anyway, here it is. Listen, I don't want to. I could convulse you with a monologue tonight, but I don't want to. I don't want to waste time. We have only one guest tonight, as you may know, and ABC is very glad about that. They figure that somewhere there is a footsore, tired family with no place to sit down, and they have rented out my extra chairs tonight. So we only have our one guest. You understand, of course. And I guess you know who the guest is. Because we have one guest, you do not need to conserve your laughter, however. It's a gentleman who has many, well, he started, first, many years ago, he was called a boy genius, the way that Mozart and Keats and Paul Anka have been. And I think that instead of the monologue, since this is a very special show, and I know that you came, many of you, just to see him tonight, I would like to open, if we can, with a piece of film that we found. And those of you who film students know this movie very well. It's the end of The Lady from Shanghai. And it's one of the, must have been one of the most difficult things to film. You really don't need to know the plot. This is toward the end, and it is when the hero is in a fun house. And it's an unforgettable thing. If you ever saw this piece of film at an impressionable age, you can never forget it. And here is that clip from Lady from Shanghai made by our guest, and he's in it. Let's take my first guest tonight, and only guest, is unique. There is no one quite like him, I guess. He is an actor, a director, a writer. He has been a magician and a number of other things. As you all know, at 22, he was producing, directing, and starring in Broadway, and actually 3 plays in his own repertory company. He set the film industry on its ear when he made Citizen Kane, frightened the country with the radio broadcast War of the Worlds, which he thought was merely an entertainment, but which a lot of people took seriously. This is, and before he was 30, he had directed, as you know, Citizen Kane, which many people still think is one of the finest films ever made, and is on everybody's list of the best films. He's played just about all of the interesting roles in Shakespeare. He has made 45 films. People fall over themselves trying to describe him. Charlton Heston was on recently and has said probably the greatest theatrical talent this country has ever produced. Kenneth Tynan once said, if you have met him, and later when you were bored and you try to think of the one person you would like to have walk through the door, it would be Orson Welles. I don't think anyone has ever called him an average kid from Kenosha, Wisconsin, but that's where he's from. To us in the business, he's a pioneer and a hero, and to people who are not in the business, he's a legend, but he doesn't like to be treated as that. So will you just welcome the gentleman, please, Orson Welles. That's more than I got.
You did 2 shows today.
That's true. How do you know that?
I came in when the last show was still on.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Is that a terrible secret I shouldn't have divulged?
No, not at all.
They know about tape out there in television land.
I think by this time most people know.
I barely caught on to the idea myself. I still think everything is live. I wish it were.
Do you? Do you miss the...
Don't you?
Yeah, although I don't know if the audience is that aware. I mean, when you're sitting and watching the thing,
But when you bleep or bloop or whatever it is, every 3rd word out of some of your guests, the audience must know something is happening. No censor could be that agile.
No, there is a thing, you know, that they use, though, on live television, where they use like a 6-second tape delay or something, so that although it's live, it's a little bit on tape, and then they can push a button, and if you say...
It's like being a little pregnant, isn't it? How can you be a little bit on tape?
It's less serious. No, it's actually running through a tape machine, and if you were to say a dirty word now, I would have... well, don't try it. But I would have a chance to push the button, knowing that the sound would be erased a little ahead, and then play.
Where is that button?
That's
I see. This is the
one.
special. This is the special thing.
Yeah, they have done some shows like that.
Is that the principle of what happens when they run back certain plays in a game and show it to you?
Instant replay.
Instant replay.
I don't know.
Are we way out of our depth, both of us?
Your quest-
Better get on to something else.
Your questions are good. The fact that I don't have the answers is the hard part. I like something you said one time, a lot of things you said, but I remember I found a quote in which you had said, I like people to talk to me, but I hate it when they talk to Orson Welles. And I know what you mean by that. Because
Sure.
people, I think I do anyway.
Sure,
I'll try
because
not to-
they put, I don't mean just me, I'm sure you know what it is. If they talk to Dick Cavett, they put on that funny hat that goes with talking to Dick Cavett, and they aren't themselves.
Yeah.
You know, just because they've seen you on a screen, large or little, you have a kind of identity for them that makes them come on a little differently than themselves, and is kind of a drag.
Could you go easy on the large or little part?
I didn't mean that. I was
No,
talking
of course.
about screen.
Oh, on the size of the screen.
Yes, and I don't like talk about widescreens myself.
You know,
I think we can leave this whole territory
I think probably, yeah.
undeveloped.
Yes. I don't think what people look like has anything to do with what they are. Listen, I want to ask you about that piece of film that we saw. I know that you hate to have your films excerpted and
I was
and
coyly
like that, and-
turning my face to the wall all during it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know why. Is it because it can't possibly tell any of the story and it's just out of context? It's a little...
No, it's because I can't possibly fix it. And I always see things wrong with it, and I'd rather look back on these films as being much better than they were.
That scene, for example, then, would you change anything about that now?
Well, I know what I changed from listening to it, which is the awful soundtrack.
That may have been our projector.
No, it wasn't. It's
No.
Harry Cohn. Yeah? Because what happened was that after the my version of it, which got its one preview, Harry decided to fix the music, and he got a theme song, which we then had Rita sing. This was in the early days of theme songs. It's when people sang them on screen instead of having combinations dinted into your ears all through the story. Every once in a while somebody came on and said, well, since I'm waiting for the leading man, I think I'll sing a song. And they, you know, and they sang a song. So we put that in, Please Don't Kiss Me or Love Me or something or other.
Yeah.
Not a bad song, really. And Peggy Lee was quite good in it, off scene, because she was Rita's voice for that. Although Rita sang quite a lot of her own songs in her own musicals, but at Harry Cohn's whim, Peggy Lee or somebody like that would be brought in to sing part of it. I never understood that any more than I understand instant replay. But the point that I'm laboring towards is that Harry Cohn decided that the theme song would be nice in a sort of symphonic version under the shootout in the mirror scene. So instead of just hearing the crash of glass echoing and nothing else except ricocheting bullets and glass, you have all through it, which kind of louses up the proceedings.
But it made him happy.
Yes,
Yeah.
it made him happy.
Gee, he is one of the most interesting characters in
He was.
filmdom because no one ever apologizes for saying a rotten thing about a man who is dead because they always refer to him as the unlamented Harry Cohn. He
Well,
must
I
have been
lament him.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I liked him. I really did, because he was a monster.
Yeah.
But they all were, or almost all of them, those guys who ran their own stores in those old days of Hollywood. But he came on as a monster, and he could never be as bad as his first impression. So everything was a pleasant surprise after that. You know, he snarled at you as you came in the door, you know, "Rah," like that. Yeah. And you could gradually throw him little goodies, and he would quiet down and start lashing his tail. And I did get to be quite fond of him, in spite of the fact that he bugged my office. He really did. I think he bugged everybody's office, but one day I found a microphone behind a picture and discovered that this led up to Harry Cohn's own office so he could tune in. So at those days I had a radio show, and I'd begin every day at the office. I'd say, well, good morning, everybody. This is Mercury Productions beginning another day's work. We hope you'll enjoy it. We'd play the theme and then go on in the office for his benefit. And then at the end of the day, I'd say, well, that winds up another day at the Mercury. Tune in tomorrow. But he was all right, you know. He was all right because he had tremendous courage.
How so?
Well, if he believed in something, he would go the distance, what gamblers describe as going the distance, which is a great quality in a showman.
Yeah.
And I was eternally grateful to him for what he did for me, because I had a musical only a few doors away from here, Around the World in 80 Days. And I had to open in Boston. I had a lot of costumes waiting. Did I tell you this story?
No, no.
I had a lot of costumes waiting in the railway station, which couldn't go from the railway station to the theater, about 8 blocks away. This was in Boston, where we were opening, unless somebody paid Brooks Costume Company $47,000. And we didn't have $47,000 because originally we had a producer called Mike Todd who had gone broke. And I had done that terrible scene in movies where he said, "Come on, kids," you know. George Murphy used to always do that, and Gene Kelly, people like that say, "Come on, kids, we'll get the show on anyway." You know, that terrible thing. And I did that. I heard myself speaking these terrible, corny lines, and there I was stuck with $350,000 worth of show that I had to get on somehow. And a lot of things happened trying to get it on. Can I tell one story parenthetically before getting to that?
Sure.
The man who wrote the music was Cole Porter. And everybody said, "Don't have Cole Porter because he's written out," you see. And in fact, he'd written a couple of not very successful shows just before that. And I said, nobody with all that genius could possibly be written out. And I did the show with him, and he wrote a complete score, not one note of which was ever heard on radio or indeed on the lips of anybody wishing to whistle their way up the aisle out of the theater. And the next show he wrote was Kiss Me, Kate. So you see, I'd had a little bit of bad luck. And stuck in Boston with a musical without a single song and needing $47,000 before curtain time, I found myself in the box office trying to think of who could send me this money. And I thought Harry Cohen, who I hardly knew. And I called him up on the long-distance phone. I said, "Harry Cohen, this is Orson Welles. I've just read a book," and I turned a paperback around, which the girl had in front of her was selling tickets, and I said, "It's called something or other." It wasn't a lady from Shanghai then, just this. "Buy it, and I will make it for you if you'll send me $47,000 in 2 hours." And he did.
Gee.
And that's how the picture was made.
If no book had been lying there, it would have been no.
So
That's a good
he's
story.
lamented as far as I'm concerned.
Gee, that's good. We wait for a moment. We have a message, and we'll be right back. Are you ever going to write, may I call you Orson again?
Oh, my goodness. Wouldn't it be ridiculous if you didn't?
All right. Are you ever going to do a biography of yourself?
Well, I don't think a biography, because nowadays there's if you buy somebody's life story, they expect an awful lot of the sort of material that I don't tell anybody, you know, much less whoever would have the price of a book. I think one's privacy is invaded enough without doing it to oneself. But I would like sometime to write a book of, with memoir's an awful pompous word, but on subjects that interest me and about people I've known and liked rather than, and disasters and pleasures that I've had and all that, but not a 1, 2, 3 ABC, you know, one sunny morning in Kenosha, a chubby little one, you know.
I do know.
You know, that kind of thing.
You know, your childhood, though, does interest me. I really envy it. The idea, I never got to Europe until my present age, and a lot of people don't ever get there. And the thought of a child being taken there over and over as a kid, when was the earliest you went?
Well, I've spent my whole life kind of gypsying around. My father lived in Peking for quite a long time, and I spent 5 or 6 years there, or the greater part of those years. He stayed in Peking just because the living was easy there. You know, he liked to live au prince, in a very grand way, and he was born with a lot of bread and cast it on the waters, and it failed to return. And the only way he could really live it up was in Peking, where you could have 400 servants and give dinner parties with gold plate and have columns of ice with trees of orchids frozen into them for a mere pittance, relatively speaking. And that's what brought us to Peking. And I was sent to Europe at a very early age on trips first with other little boys and then by myself, totally without any guidance. The idea was you've got to learn to be on your own. That had happened to my father when he was about 10.
How little
and he
then?
did it to me. At 10 was the first time I actually traveled alone in Europe with just so much money tied into my jeans, and there I went, you know.
Did that seem romantic and exciting?
Terribly romantic.
Yeah.
Terribly romantic. What seemed even more romantic to me were all the expensive hotels and restaurants I couldn't afford to get into on the amount of money they thought I should learn to get along on.
Can you
That
remember?
didn't seem a bit picturesque. I'm sure you know.
Can you remember meeting people then that you realized later the significance of, if you know what I mean? I mean,
No, because
did
I
you
think
meet
I
them?
realized then.
You did.
Yeah, people told me, and I was very impressed by great people and interesting people as a kid. I was very interested in older people, unlike most young people are indeed.
That is odd for a kid. You didn't have little friends that you played with. In
I
the
had
sense that
I had little friends who if they were big enough, chased me around the block, and little friends who, if they were meek enough, I bullied. But it was always pretty much of a battle in the contemporary scene. And I was always scared of teenagers.
Why?
I hated them before I was in my teens. I thought they were insane.
Yeah.
And after I spent all my teens pretending not to be in my teens, but in my 20s, and avoiding that age. And it's only recently, since the teenagers have become the rulers and sovereigns of the world, that I've changed my opinion. But until this very latest generation, I have been very strongly of the conviction that there are periods during one's adolescence when one is feverishly insane.
Well said.
That's been changed, however, now.
You have certain sympathy now with that age.
More than sympathy. I'm grateful to them even for their fever.
We have a message, and we will be right back after that. Please stay where you are. Talking with Orson Welles. I guess I just can't get over that childhood of yours. The little scraps I've read about it, sitting at tables at your age with people who were, well, in other countries for one thing, but sometimes world leaders, I suppose. Or were there any world leaders?
Oh yes, the world leader that really came to nothing, as far as my memory is concerned, was Hitler. I was being escorted. I went twice through the Tyrol and Austrian German hiking country. Once with one teacher and once with another. And one of the two teachers was, it turned out, a sort of a budding Nazi. And there was a big Nazi rally near Innsbruck. In the days when the Nazis were just a very comical kind of minority party of nuts that nobody took seriously at all, except my hiking companion, this gentleman and his knapsack, and he wangled a place at the table with the great men of this tiny little party of cranks. And I remember very well afterwards, Stryker, who was the leader of the big anti-Semitic campaigns, and 2 or 3 other well-known people to this day. The man sitting next to me was Hitler, and he made so little impression on me that I can't remember a second of it.
Gee.
He had no personality whatsoever.
Wonder if
He was invisible.
Wonder if under hypnosis it would come out.
No, I think there was nothing there that anybody'd remember till you had 5,000 people yelling, "Sieg Heil," Heil Hitler. That's the whole point of the story, that there wasn't anything to remember.
What about those films that were made about him by Leni Riefenstahl?
Pretty good films.
Are they? You often hear that
They are awfully well made, yes.
Is she alive?
Yes.
Have you met her?
No, I haven't met her. But she's living, I think, in England or some place like that, and hustling around trying to get, to flog a documentary here and there.
Yeah.
On almost any subject.
Gee, interesting thing.
I never met Stalin. I never met Stalin, but Roosevelt I knew very well, and Churchill, and lots of, during childhood and then youth, of course. I was very lucky in that respect.
What age were you when you were orphaned?
Well, my mother died when I was 7, and my father died when I was 15, beginning of my 15th birthday. Then I ran away, tried to stay out of school, out of Harvard. I had a scholarship, and desperate not to be educated, I went into the theater. I made it. I wasn't educated.
What if you were now? I mean, what if you wanted to go to school? Do you have any idea what you want to study now?
Gee, that's a good question. Everything, I guess. But
Yeah.
if I wanted to study seriously, you know, and get good at a subject, I think it would be anthropology. Don't you think that's a fascinating subject?
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I would too. I don't know. Or maybe philosophy. I never thought about it very much.
I'm suspicious of philosophy. I have a real Philistine doubt about its worth, you know. But anthropology seems to me to be just at its beginnings, and philosophy kind of at its end.
And we are at the end of this segment, but we will be
What a
right
good
back.
cue
Is that
that
too
was, yes.
too contrived? We'll be back after this message. Who else stands out from that time in your life? What faces come to mind?
Yeah, well, you mean famous ones?
Sure, or infamous,
Yes,
or not
yeah.
famous, or any of that.
Well, we had Schicklgruber, but you know wonderful people that aren't famous. I guess one of the most remarkable people I ever knew was somebody called Cornelia Lunt. And Alfred Lunt used to pretend to be her cousin. They weren't related at all. They loved each other. And she was, when I knew her, in her middle 90s, and had been a hostess of great importance, although very young, in the Civil War in America, and knew intimately all the great names of the Civil War. Could tell you all about what Lincoln said and what my great-grandfather Gideon Welles said, who was Secretary of Navy in the cabinet. And she was a great kind of raconteur on the Civil War. And then she went over to London, where she was at the American Embassy, and where she knew everybody in England. All those fabulous people that seemed to have been dead for 200 years, you know, in the Victorian age. Yeah. And it was, you could only get her to tell about these things with great difficulty. She didn't go on and on like I do. You had to drag it out of her, and she was delicious. She was an old lady who, when she gave a big party, sat on a little stool, and she gave you a big chair. If you can imagine an old lady like that. She was very beautiful. Must have been not so beautiful when she was young, but one of those people that old age glorifies. And she had a little bell. And when she wanted everybody to be quiet so she could say something, she'd ring her bell. And then we'd all be quiet, and she'd make her little statement, then ring it again, and everybody could talk again. And she's one of the great people I've known, you know, as great, certainly, as Churchill or Roosevelt or George Marshall, and I suppose Marshall is the greatest man I ever met.
Really?
Yes, I would think so.
What would you admire about him above everybody else?
Human being. I think he's the greatest human being who was also a great man, whom I was ever privileged to meet.
Have you known some that were...
Can I tell a little story about him?
Certainly.
We'd been campaigning for Roosevelt, not George Marshall, but some of the rest of us, and one of our rewards when he got in again, one of those many times that he did, was to go to a big party of very big brass and sit on the dais and be treated as though we were part of the high command, just for one night. And there were all these tremendous names from the Second World War. 2 or 3 civilians. Truman, the vice president, who was playing the piano. We were rather embarrassed about that because he didn't seem to be awfully good on the piano. And we didn't know that he was going to be a great president, you see.
I see.
And it didn't look as though he did either, as a matter of fact. But he and so there were only about 4 or 5 civilians. All the rest were tremendous brass, dripping with gold, braid and medals and everything else. And it was in the Mayflower Hotel in Washington. And a door opened. And G.I., more innocent looking than anything you could possibly imagine and younger than anything you could dream of, stuck his head in. at the moment when General Marshall happened to look toward the door. And the boy looked at him. He said, "Gee, General Marshall, can I come in and say hello to you?" Marshall said, "Yeah, come in." And Marshall didn't know anybody was watching. This wasn't a grandstand play. I was in a position, my camera was angled, so he didn't know he was getting photographed in anybody's film of memory.
Yeah.
And he took the boy aside, away from everybody, and sat down with him. And I heard as he went that the boy had been away from home. And the boy recognized Marshall as somebody like a family. Now, this was the commander of all the Allied forces. And he sat with this boy without any grandstanding at all, and just put him at ease and made him feel at home again for half an hour and left all the rest of us. He was that kind of fellow.
I wonder what the difference is between a man like that and the ones who are impressive publicly but couldn't be bothered to talk to anyone that isn't important to them or flattering.
Well, I don't know. Those kind of people are all second-rate who can't be bothered at all, ever. Yeah. But there are those who can't be bothered sometimes. You know, and that's... You had a feeling with Marshall that if it were possible to be bothered, he would let himself be bothered. Yeah. He was a tremendous gentleman, you know, an old-fashioned institution which isn't with us anymore.
You almost never want to ask anyone the question who's impressed you the most, and it's wonderful to have a guest who can give you the answer.
Well, I never do know the answers to those kind of
questions,
questions,
hard, aren't they?
You know, but I just happened to know that one.
Yeah.
Of course, I was immensely impressed with Churchill, but he was quite another thing, you know. He had great humor and great irony. He went to see me when I played Othello on the stage in London, and I heard a low murmuring in the front row. I thought he was talking to himself, and then he came backstage afterwards and sat down in the dressing room and said, "Most potent, grave, and reverend signors, my most approved good masters," and began the whole of Othello's part, which he had memorized, and including the cuts which I had made, which he read with a good deal of extra emphasis. And then a few years afterwards, I happened to be in Venice trying to get some money for a movie during the festival, and poor Churchill had been, right after the war, as you know, crest of the greatest victory that any single man had ever presided over in modern history, was voted out of office. Quite properly, probably, but it was a tragic blow for him. And there he was in the hotel at the Lido with Clemmy, his wife, alone. And he'd go swimming out on the beach. And one day at lunch, I came in with a Russian businessman I was trying to hustle for some money for this picture. And as we passed Mr. Churchill's table, Mr. Churchill saw me and made that little gesture, and the Russian went out of his mind. This is a white Russian, not a red Russian. This is a, you know, a hustling, semi-Armenian Russian. And when he saw that Mr. Churchill not only knew me, but gave a rather special acknowledgement, it was clear to me that I had the money for my picture. So the next morning I was out swimming in the beach, and I found myself paddling in the water right next to Mr. Churchill. And I hadn't gone up to speak to him, but there we were in the water, and I had known him on and off during the war in a humble capacity, and I said, and he had come backstage to see me, and I said, "Mr. Churchill, I think you ought to know what you did for me." And I told him about how this acknowledgement had meant so much to me with my financier. And that day at lunch, I came in with the financier again, and Mr. Churchill rose from his chair and bowed.
That is good.
Pretty good, huh?
That's good. We'll be back after this message. You've lived all over the place, all over the globe, and then for a long time when you were not in this country, then you suddenly came back. Oh, what opinion do you have of some of the generalizations that are made about the country, that there's something violent in the American character, for example, or that...
Well, there is.
Or that the country's...
I think there is, don't you?
I
think there always has been.
Right?
Though.
Yeah.
I think it's part of our whole story. I think one thing that is generally true, the one generalization which is true about America is that everything is true about it.
Yeah.
It's impossible to say anything that isn't true, good or bad. Our enemies are right, our friends are right.
Yeah.
It's an awful big country, an awful lot of different kinds of people in it, and violence always has been part of our story. It is, you know, I've seen it in my own lifetime long before this period, and we certainly read about it in history. That's the way we won the country and stole it away from the Indians and all the rest of it.
Is it? I wonder why it should be, though. There's any reason why the English, if they had had Indians in England before they were Englishmen there,
Well,
that they
they
would
had
have
some
been
Indians in India,
Yes, they did, didn't they? Yeah.
and they had those kind of folks all over, and they, in some places they brought the law and justice, and I've talked to people in other ex-colonies, nice people, when you mention the British, burst into tears of anger, literally tears of rage about our nice English cousins. So the bad things are true about them. They burnt the roofs off of the Irish and starved them out into the cold. There's nothing that you can think of that the English didn't do to that island right next door to them, to the Irish, over a period of 700 years, and we're English. And then we added a lot of other violent mixtures to the brew. I think man is a crazy animal.
Yeah.
I think we're also marvelous people, divine in our potentialities. You see, there you are, you can say anything with passion and get a hand. But seriously, I think everything is true about people, just as it's true about America. We can do anything vile and anything great. And all the generalizations are true, and all of them are boring, as you must certainly have noted in the line of your work. Could I ask you about your work? Could I interview you?
I know that probably...
Is that a good idea?
I suppose... Well, I'll tell you.
Is it impertinent of my part? You want
Well, let me tell you, it's frightening to meet a legend, and I know that it must be upsetting for you, too. And I know that half your life has been spent wanting to know about me, so shoot.
Well, it seems like that's true, because I've been watching you an awful long time.
Well,
And with great pleasure,
that's very nice.
as millions of other people have been doing. I think that deserves a little applause.
Oh, no.
I'm just trying to work them up. But really, I would like to know more about you, and I bet there are millions of people who don't know much about you except as you appear in the course of your conversation. In other words, the other night on the show, or not the other night, some weeks ago, I heard you say, to my distress, that you had once been an actor.
Ah, yes.
Now, I'm always sorry to hear anybody that I admire has been an actor.
There are those who were more immediately distressed than you were hearing it that night. Yes, I was one of the, I guess, in the annals of the theater, I guess probably one of the top 3 second murderers in Richard III.
But was that your only role?
Yes, and unfortunately, it wasn't even in the play Richard III. I was in a repertory thing. This actually happened to me one night. I committed the awful sin of being in repertory and coming out and doing a line from the wrong play. Not just one line, but it certainly...
If you've done that, you're a veteran, because we've all done that.
Have you done that?
Oh, my goodness.
Have you?
Oh, my goodness, yes. We even did a gag of it. By the way, you said something wrong when you introduced me. You said, and this is a parenthesis, that I'd produced 3 plays in my repertory company and then went to Hollywood, and in fact, we did dozens and dozens of shows. At one time, we had a repertory in which we were, our proposition, our idea was to do a tragedy, which was Danton's death, and another night, a farce by La Biche. And we had a famous actor from Middle Europe playing in the tragedy, and he didn't have any part in the farce. But every night of the farce, he used to come in during the big door slamming thing, dressed up as Robespierre, look around and say, "Oh, mistake," and run out again in the wrong play. So, which showed the right spirit. But of course, but we've all, you know, in Shakespeare, you go into the wrong lines all the time. Because of the rhythm.
Sure.
If you stop thinking for a minute, you're in another play.
I saw another actor do it one time. This was at Stratford, Connecticut, but he came on and he started The Merchant of Venice right in the middle of the council scene in Othello. And it's pretty hard when the Council of Cyprus breaks up laughing and giggling in the serious scene. It's very, very
Now, you
distracting
began
to the
as an
movie.
actor? Excuse me if I press on with this.
That's all right. You won't learn anything.
When did you go straight?
I While you were asking that question, I think. That startled me. No, I'm kind of a male garbo, Mr. Wells. I like to preserve a great deal of mystery about myself and my
so ends the
origins.
interview?
And that's it. Yep. Oh, my name's up on the screen. We have a message. We'll be right back. Gee, there's so many things.
Excuse me, I don't think we should let you weasel out of this quite so easily.
But I'm thinking of them.
You know, you sit there night after night for 90 minutes at a time, drunk with power,
Yes,
pelting people with questions and a few simple little requests for information. And what do we get? You know, the second murderer.
that's right.
Right? Now, what did you do after leaving the boards?
After leaving the boards, well, then I was a comedy writer for a while. I wrote for
That I knew.
Jack Parr and others.
Now, that brings me to a question. You mentioned Jack Parr, and then you say, and others.
Yes, I do.
Who are the others?
I'm learning how to do this. This is very good. Does Jerry Lewis ring a bell?
A rather dim gong. I'm getting to sound like Noel.
Yes, you are.
Sort of fat Noel.
Noel Coward.
Not as funny, but the same delivery. No, no, really. I'd like to press on with an embarrassing question.
Really?
You know, among tenors, for example,
Yes.
among newscasters, among Shakespearean actors, even among politicians, there's very little reluctance to discuss the competition. But why among you fellows who sit saying, will you welcome, please, a sweet singer of songs, and when did you stop beating your
Yeah.
wife, and all the rest of it,
Yeah.
why do you fellows shrivel up? Your heads get like little walnuts when anybody ever mentions, for example, Johnny Carson or Merv Griffin or David Frost. What is this reluctance to mention even the names?
All right, that's a good question.
What will we do? You know, you're all like that. It isn't just you. There must be a professional reason.
And not express even an opinion on them.
Yes,
is
it's
quite
sort of a
common, too.
terrible
I think
clamming up.
I think it's because you are in competition with them in a sense, although those guys are both friends of mine that you mentioned. I've worked for them and all. And you feel kind of funny talking about somebody who's doing sort of the same thing you do. And I think that's why none of us ever mention the other jerks, the other fellas who do. Oh, you've trapped me, Mr. Wells. I know, it's interesting.
I
though.
don't feel that I have somehow.
No.
You're a sly one.
You've
Dick
stripped
Cavett.
me
Yeah.
bare.
Yeah, all right. I see I'm getting nowhere with that line of
Well, you know what?
questioning.
It makes me uncomfortable because I feel that I'm here every night. And
So are they.
And you're not, you see.
Oh, I see. So you
feel-
don't want me to go on with this?
Well, you
and
can.
you'll remain this mystery forever?
Yeah, I feel like I'm a thinly wrapped enigma. There may not be that much there to know. But while you're here, I feel obligated to all those people, particularly the film buffs, who expect me to ask you certain questions, but then you're probably tired of a lot of those.
I never answer them.
Yeah.
I never answer them, not because of general snottiness. It's just that I don't know the answers to most of the questions. You mentioned Jerry Lewis.
Yeah.
And I caught him on one of your friend's shows. I guess we call him your friend.
Yes.
We don't mention them. I caught them on one of your friend's shows. In fact, he was on interminably on one of your friend's shows.
Yeah.
And I feel that what he did for Myra Breckenridge, I ought to do for Jerry Lewis. Because he really has a way of coming on as a great thinker, which should be stopped. Why I mention him, though, and I'm not going to mention him much longer, because I would hate to do for him what he did for my recognition. Why I mention is because he said the sort of thing that you hear from film buffs, and you don't expect to hear from Jerry Lewis. He actually said on The Tonight Show,
Yeah.
well, the secret of authenticity and complete autocracy and autonomy is autonomy and cinematic integrity. Or words to that effect. Now, those are the kind of questions that the film buffs like to ask. And I guess Jerry Lewis answers because he teaches how to make movies in a school, among other things, I believe. That was a thought he dropped several times. And my bitterness about him stems from the fact that here's a rich fellow who has plenty other things to do except come on with that kind of dialogue. There's really too much of it.
There's
Too many long words. You know there are too many long words in the world nowadays, and that the younger the people are, the longer the words are. Have you noticed that? It's a very funny thing. They have a wonderful new hip language, which is really our old Harlem language that I used to know when I was running a theater up there, with a few new phrases, and they're great and very colorful. But everything else is terribly long. Nobody says, I see a thing a certain way. They say, I envisage it. Nobody says, under 30, I would like to think up an idea. They say, I have conceived something, or this is my conception, or not, this is my relationship. Everything is 4 or 5 syllables long. Have you noticed that?
There's a veracity in what you're saying. Do you have any recurrent dreams?
I think we'll take a break.
Oh, you can play at this game. We'll be back after this one. See, that was good. I wondered, one thing I read about you that I found a little surprising was that you, check me on this, did not like solitude.
I love solitude.
Then they were wrong.
You bet. But aren't they always wrong in what they write?
I guess so. Have you been badly misquoted?
But I think everybody is, and everything. I don't think history can possibly be true. Possibly. I'll tell you why. Because we all know people who get things written about, and we know that they're lies what is written. I told a story to Buck Henry last year in Wymus, and he told the story that he thought I had told him to a newspaper that I read the other day, and it bears not the slightest resemblance to what I said. Now, that's an intelligent man, a year later, meaning me well, and that's, the gospel according to Buck Henry, and it's totally apocryphal. Imagine what nonsense everything else is.
I know. It is. Do you want to clear it up now?
About that I don't like solitude?
No, the story.
No, it isn't worth going into all that. It isn't all that good a story.
Yeah. When you were on that film, and
he made it seem, I must say he improved it. Maybe that's why it was just authorship.
History is an improved version of what happened.
No, not necessarily. Only if Buck Henry writes it, I guess.
I see. What about when you're on a film like that where somebody else is directing and they do tend to be in awe of you as much as you don't like people to be? And Mike Nichols was making that film. He said it would probably, he was worried about the fact that he would know that you working just as an actor were also thinking about the direction at the same time. How can you calm somebody down about that?
In his case, he was put at his ease almost immediately when he sensed, as he must have sensed, since he's an immensely intuitive man, that I enormously admired him. And so how could he have been anything but comfortable?
What do they mean when they say, you know, that someone said about you who'd worked with you in a film, he not only knows if he's in the shot, he knows so much about movies, he knows if he's in focus. Is this possible?
Well, I know where the camera is cutting. I know what's in the shot and what isn't from a long working acquaintanceship with lenses and the camera. You know, I'm at ease in that respect. You have to learn that if you jump back and forth. It's not all that miraculous. Sounds great, but isn't all that wonderful.
So you really can tell if you're in focus.
Yeah, and it's not that hard to do.
Yeah. Is it nitpicking or annoying when people ask specific little questions about film, like in Citizen Kane? People remember that.
It's nitpicking.
Oh. Okay.
No, sorry. That was rude. I beg your pardon. Cheap and easy gag.
That's
Finish
right.
it.
No, I'm not going to ask it now.
So.
No. I was going to say that everybody remembers, get this in, everybody remembers that one scene where you suddenly cut to a cockatoo screeching just before.
That was
you
to
went
wake
into
up the
scene.
audience.
It's as
That's
simple
the
as that.
entire significance of the cockatoo.
I just can't get I can't get a pretentious answer out of you. We will be back after message. Stay where you are. This is an album, Orson Welles' The Begatting of the President, and it goes from FDR up to the current time, and Mr. Welles was very sensitive and kind, asked me not to even mention it. And
Yes, I know, that's the way it goes.
So,
well, it's biblical.
It is biblical
tone,
and humorous
but
at the
comical
same time.
in intention.
Good combination.
Yes, yes.
What does it mean that you were a brigadier general once?
Now, there's a question. Well, you want my war memories, do you?
I'd like that.
Well, I used to be drafted every month all during the war.
Oh.
And I was drafted every month and thrown out the same day because of a bad back and a lot of other things. But drafted every month because the draft board contained some Hearst people. And Hearst was after me because of Kane, and this was a good way to needle me. So right up to the end, when there were, you know, just the bottom of the barrel was lining up, you know, dressed like they do at the end of the first act of Hair, and waiting to shuffle off into oblivion, there I was a familiar figure, I may say, in the draft department. And during the course of the war, I was sent on several totally idiotic missions of one sort and another in a civilian capacity. But when you are flown over or near enemy territory as a civilian, they give you sort of a semi-official title so that if you're captured, highly unlikely situation, you will be treated by the rank that your documents say you have. And several times I was a major and I made chicken colonel, and once as a joke somebody made me brigadier general, which wasn't that unusual. Sometimes kind of faintly well-known people got to be brigadier general on a piece of paper in case you were captured. Well, here I am in the draft board right near the end of the war once again. We're all lined up, and for some reason the sergeant says, all right, anybody who's ever been in the Army or have held any rank, please step forward. And, about 10 of us stepped forward. He says, all right, anybody, what the rank, anybody above the rank of corporal? That left about 3.
Yeah.
He says, above the rank of sergeant, and that left me. Now, you know the rest of this. I had been up for several nights, and I wasn't at my best. I didn't think. And he says, what was your rank? And I said, brigadier general. And he said, all right, down on your hands and knees and pick up all the cigarette butts, General. And I spent the rest of the day naked, picking up cigarette butts for having been a general. That's my, my war service.
None of that was captured on film.
Luckily, no.
Yeah.
We didn't make those kind of movies then.
I wonder, we only have 2 minutes left. Has anyone ever made a pornographic masterpiece?
I think it could only be a masterpiece of pornography, but not a masterpiece which was pornographic, if you understand what I mean. In other words, if what you're after is to excite people sexually, overexcite them or stimulate them, then it should be possible to make a film which is exciting and is therefore a masterpiece of excitation. But you cannot make a film masterpiece which is pornographic because the material is antipathetic to the film. You can get as dirty as you want, but not also excite people, because exciting people during the course of a story, exciting them sexually, is changing the subject so completely that you have no more narrative form.
Well, there goes my project.
What you'd been thinking for?
No, someone asked about that the other day, and I was curious about it. We have a minute left. If we were loading on the Ark now, and you could grab 4 or 5 films, not your own, but other people's, to save on the Ark for posterity, what would you grab? Too tough?
Quick, another answer.
Another question?
Yeah.
Oh,
Another. You've
2
completely
films.
thrown me. 2 films.
Yeah.
2 films. 2 films. Grande Illusion of Renoir.
Yeah.
And Something else.
I'll never do that to you again. We will be back after this message from our local station. Thank you, Mr. Wells.
Dick, I think I ought to explain for our viewers that Something Else, of course, is the film directed by James Cruise with Rod LaRocque and Corinne Griffith.
There is a something else?
Look it up.
Oh, you've stunned me, and I'm sorry I grabbed you with that question like that. But you did.
It's something we'll all look for.
Grand Illusion and something else. Gee, thank you for being here. This is really a pleasure, and I feel very lucky to know you at all.
Thank you, Dick.
Please come again.
It was great.
Good night. Sorry?
They'll look it up now.
They will. You've pulled a hoax on the public.